Now, I'm not exactly sure where this photo of George H.W. Bush wearing his little Harry Potter Freemason hat came from, but if you notice the number 77 on it, understand that there's nothing random about this, neither that nor the goat's head in the middle. Now, with the recent disappearance of the Boeing 777, I thought it might be time to play a little numbers game. Let's look at the number 77 and the number 777. I'm not going to bother getting too deep into the esoteric meanings because honestly, numerology is not really my thing, but I do see the patterns when they are so glaringly obvious. Let's start with the 7/7 bombings, a terrible terrorist event that took place in London, and how that correlates to Flight 77 that crashed into the Pentagon on 9/11. Could be a coincidence, but what about the fact that Anders Breivik supposedly killed 77 people in Norway in another terrorist event? And how about the fact that Washington, D.C. was deliberately placed on the 77th meridian? If you know anything about history, Washington, D.C. was planned from top to bottom by Freemasons. And speaking of Freemasons, Aleister Crowley, history's most famous Satanist, Freemason, occultist, you name it, wrote a piece called Liber Oz 77 and another piece called 777 and other Kabbalistic writings. If you think Aleister Crowley is just some crazy kook, and yes, he does look like one, do a little research on him. He is one of the most influential men of the modern era. If you doubt this, look into his relationship with Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons was a famous NASA rocket scientist, and a good portion of NASA was actually attending Aleister Crowley's cult of Thelema, as he called it, which isn't completely surprising because NASA has always been a Freemasonic organization. So I was watching a Denzel Washington movie, and it was called Unstoppable, and it was about a runaway train, and the number featured on the side of that train was 777. And then it got me thinking about Jay-Z and his clothing line called Rockaware, and the name of his record company is called Rockefeller, and that obviously is connected to the Rockefellers, a notoriously rich family, definitely connected to this kind of occult symbolism. And on this sweatshirt here, we see the year 1977. And then they have another rapper, Lil Wayne, who has a 77 and a pyramid shape on his article of clothing here. And here's Jay-Z. We connect him back to Aleister Crowley wearing a sweatshirt that says, "Do what thou wilt." That was Aleister Crowley's most famous quote. Now, where it really gets interesting, setting hip-hop aside, is an Arthur C. Clarke book called The Rendezvous with Rama, and that was published in 1972. In this book, a world-ending event takes place on September 11th in the year 2077. Now, there's a building constructed in honor of Arthur C. Clarke in New York City to resemble the monoliths featured in the work Space Odyssey 2001. Now, if you've read the book or watched the movie, you might remember that these monoliths played a pivotal role in the transformation of humanity as a whole. And so, a building was constructed to resemble these monoliths called the Millennium Hilton. And where did this building stand? Well, when the towers came down, this building stood directly across them, witnessing this transformational event for all of humanity. And it's no wonder that Stanley Kubrick wanted to direct Space Odyssey 2001, as all his work is deeply embedded with esoteric meaning and symbolism. It's also important to note that 911 and 77 are both emergency contact numbers. It seems we are all participating in numerology, whether we like it or not. And so we come full circle. What was George W. Bush doing on the morning of 9/11? Well, he was reading a book called My Pet Goat, which connects us back to the picture we saw at the beginning of the video, the goat's head on the hat of George H.W. Bush. And for those who aren't in the know about mainstream conspiracy culture, the goat is heavily symbolic in Freemasonic occult religious practices. In fact, Aleister Crowley wrote a hymn to Pan. This fella here is known as Baphomet, and he is doing what is known as a hermetic hand signal, which signifies as above, so below. But what makes this even more interesting is the possibility that Barbara Bush is actually the daughter of Aleister Crowley. There was opportunity for this to happen, as Barbara Bush's mother was spending time with Aleister Crowley during the time when she became pregnant with Barbara. And if you look at pictures of Barbara Bush and Aleister Crowley side by side, they could almost pass as identical twins. But before I end this video, I'd like to make one last correlation. If we look again at the missing Boeing 777 in the South Pacific, it seems all very reminiscent of a popular TV show called Lost, a show that was replete with every manner of occult symbolism. If you watch the show, you may remember that there was an episode titled Enter 77. In this episode, the characters travel back in time. Can you guess which year they traveled to? Yes, 1977.